Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Crescendo, a podcast that amplifies the voices of women in business. I'm your host, Rachel Lubchansky, an entrepreneur turned business coach and strategist, guiding women to build businesses that align with who they are at their core, the positive change they want to see in the world, and the financial security they desire. In each episode, we speak with women who have moved through the challenges and triumphs of building a business that ignites a life of purpose on purpose. I hope that the crescendo stories you hear on this show will inspire you, empower you, and guide you to step into the most authentic, full, and beautiful expression of your own voice as a business owner. My guest today is a dear friend, Ilana Sinclair. She's the founder of Capture Your Story, which is a company she founded to ensure that every individual has the chance to preserve their most cherished memories and messages for future generations. In this interview, Ilana takes us back to the pivotal moment when the vision for her business was born, and she shares the beautiful and the messy parts of growing into her new role as a business owner. This is the story of a marketer turned CEO who's built an impressive business based on her belief that everyone has a story to tell. Let's get to it. Welcome, Ilana.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you. And I'm excited to share your story with our listeners. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and how your business came to be.
Sure. Okay, so I am originally from Los Angeles and I have a background in social work. But I spent about 15 years of my career working in Jewish nonprofits. And then when we made Aliyah, moving to Israel, I transitioned into a new role as a marketing director here in Israel. So I was working as a marketing director for about 8 years. And I enjoyed it very much, but I started to have this feeling like I wanted to get back to the work I had been doing, or the reason I became a social worker in the first place. And that was mainly to work with older adults. That's always been the population that I'm most drawn to. And as COVID started becoming a reality, I had this feeling like people's stories would be disappearing. We didn't know how quickly people would get sick and pass away. And if it happened quickly, they wouldn't have the chance necessarily to pass on the family history and experiences that they had lived through and the messages they wanted to pass along to their children and grandchildren. And that was just too important to me. And I made the decision to leave the marketing work that I had been doing and to start Capture Your Story in order to ensure that people's stories could live on for generations after they were already gone. So I kind of combined that writing and marketing background with my social work passion to create this business. And now we're over 4 years into it. And thank goodness it's really doing well. And it is such a meaningful, fulfilling career. I'm just really grateful I get to do it.
It's so beautiful. I love this story because, so many things came out of this COVID era for many of us. And I think for a lot of people, it was like, well, what kinds of transitions do we need to make? And you really made this intentional transition away from a job and into your own work environment. How did you feel about doing that at the time? You had this great, beautiful idea, but how did you feel about launching your own business? Was this something that you had been thinking about for a while or had in your visions as a
Never,
younger
never.
person?
No, am not somebody who always, had this itch to become an entrepreneur and to run my own business. I was very happy being, an employee and having sort of set hours and being available to my kids. But my kids were getting older. Like when I started Capture Your Story, my youngest was 8. So he wasn't a baby anymore. And I felt like this is sort of my time. This was something that was really important to me. And even though I enjoyed the work I had been doing, it wasn't feeding my soul. It wasn't something that I was really deeply passionate about anymore. Sort of felt like I was dialing it in. And once I got this idea in my mind, it wouldn't leave me. And I felt like I have to at least give it a chance, give it a try. And I had no idea what I was doing. At the first year or year and a half, I did every part of the business myself. I built my own website and my social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. And I wrote my marketing emails and got every client by myself and then did the entire process by myself, all of the interviewing and the writing and the editing and the graphic design. I did all the parts, which I actually think in hindsight is a really great way to start a business because I understood what went into each part of the process and also where I was stronger and weaker. So there is really no comparison between the work of a professional graphic designer and what I was doing. So when I look back at those early books, I cringe, even though the clients never complained. But I'm not a graphic designer. I did my best to make them look beautiful, but now they really are beautiful. And I'm really proud to show them off. And the interviewing and the writing I loved, but it was what I really wanted to do was to be, sort of the usher to guide somebody through all the parts, but it was too much for me to do each part. So as we grew, I was able to then hire writers. And at first I thought, oh, I'll do the interviewing and then they'll do the writing. But I realized that's much harder than doing the interviews also, because then they have that connection to the client. They really get the nuance of, the emphasis on which stories are most important. And so now, because I was a part of the process, I understand that this works best. So I'll assign a writer to a client. They develop a relationship over time as they conduct the interviews, and then that same interviewer will do the writing. And then I do the editing, and then the graphic designer takes over and she does her part. So we've sort of got it worked out very well, I think, at this point. But yeah, at the beginning, no, I had no idea what I was doing.
I love that you brought this up. And this is so important for people to hear because I think a lot of people don't think about that. They're like, when can I start hiring? And I always remember back to my own childhood and even in my early 20s when I was working with my mom in her business. She owned a music school. And she used to say, like, you have to know every single aspect of your business. It doesn't mean that you don't pass it off at some point, but it's so important to know because then you can also establish the standards, the expectations for how that role is filled, how that job is fulfilled. And so it sounds like you really went about it in such a smart way. And I guess it was just intuitive for you. Would you say you're an intuitive
Um,
businesswoman?
I guess so. I do think I trust my intuition a lot, but I think I also am now realizing there are parts of my business where I'm not just learning as I go. I need to gain skills. And actually that's why working with you has been so wonderful for me because I realized I didn't go to business school and I need to make up those gaps in my knowledge. So this is sort of my chance to go back and improve the processes that are maybe not running as smoothly as they should be. But I'm only able to do this now that sort of the other parts are working really well. So yes, I think, a lot of it was trial and error and I'm still learning as I go, no question about it. And sometimes I'll find, certain writers are a better fit for our business than others or whatever. I mean, I'm learning as I go. And there's no other way to do it. I think you have to look at each blip as a learning experience. And, the same with figuring out the right clients, the clients who are the right fit for us. That can only happen once we've worked with clients that I realize, I'm not serving them by taking them on because it's not going to be what they're looking for, or it's going to take so much more time than we're able to give them. You know, if, for instance, we had a client who wanted her book in Hebrew, and I don't want to turn anybody away, but I'm not able to edit her book to the standard that I'm comfortable with. And I just didn't feel comfortable taking that on. I want our books to be a very high standard so that people can be very proud to show them off. And I would never want it to be poorly written. And even though I trusted that the writer was a good writer, I need to have that check in place so that we know for 100% certainty each book is written beautifully and has been read and reread and edited until there are no flaws. That's the goal.
Yeah.
It should be perfect.
That's great. And oh gosh, it's been so much fun working with you because you really did have such a strong foundation and a business that sells itself. I want to dig into a little bit more about the business before we get into why it's so important to talk about our stories. But as you were talking about the earlier stages of business and how you just kind of had to do things imperfectly and learn and really get into that whole trial and error, What were some of the thoughts that were going through your mind at the time? This is a show about the voices, right? The internal voices that we hear, the external voices that we decide
Mm,
whether or not to adopt and so forth. And so I really want our listeners to be able to hear what are some of those voices that were inside of you during that time when you were kind of struggling through the earlier days and the imperfection of it all.
sure. Well, I always had it in my mind that I wanted Capture Your Story to be more than just a one person business. That's why I didn't put my name in the title of the business because I didn't want it to just be about me. But I think because of that, I really held the business back a little bit because I didn't mention myself and like anywhere in any of the materials, I didn't mention my name and I didn't use my image. So I was using a lot of stock photos to try to represent, writers and clients, which I thought was a great idea. But I realized later that it came off as very impersonal because nobody knew who they were working with until they actually got to know me. Um, and also part of it was that I was not comfortable with my photo. I'm very critical of myself and I never liked, didn't want to have professional photos taken and they were expensive. And I was really doing this like bootstrapping it and doing everything myself. So I had my daughter take a photo of me on my couch. And that is what I used um, as my sort of like, profile picture, whatever, if I needed to have one. And I thought it was pretty good. Um, but as I started growing and I realized, and as I did manage to hire one writer and then two writers, that it was time to, even though it was then a group and it wasn't just me as I had hoped, it was time to insert myself into the business a little bit because I'm the first person that somebody comes into contact with when they encounter our business. And I want them to know I'm a real human being. It's not like an anonymous, you know, uh, corporate entity. This is a real small, woman run business. And the beauty of that, I mean, I call ourselves a boutique memoir writing agency. And what you get with a boutique memoir writing agency is you get very personalized, custom work. We're working with each client, crafting a book that's perfect for them and their family. And each book is different. And each set of interviews looks different. And so they should know that they're working with a real person. I'm a real person, and the writer that they're going to be matched with should be a great match for them. And they have their own story. So now on our website, now that we were able to invest in a website, I have the photos and bios of each writer. And I have a little, about section about me. So they can get to know me a little bit before we speak and see who they'll be talking to. And I have now invested in professional photos and in our marketing materials. I try to maybe once a week, I'll do a post with a photo of me. So this
I
is
think
a
this is
big change for
Yeah,
me.
and this is a really great point because I think a lot of times people are like, think about how they're going to be perceived and how it comes off, like their photo, if they're battling perfectionism, which is like most of us in this industry, I think. Um, you know, well, what if it just doesn't look perfect like a stock photo, right? It looks
Yeah.
perfect because a photographer took it and staged it and whatever.
Yes.
But you bring up this really important point, which is relatability.
Yes.
And when our businesses become relatable, where people can see themselves working inside with the people who are in there, then they become so much more attractive to our clients and our ideal clients. And
Exactly.
and so I love that you brought that up, like being able to forego that and get past our own mind drama around how we're showing up in those photos, as opposed to thinking about creating an experience for our customers where they feel invited in, quite frankly.
Exactly. And I think authenticity is such an important part of my business. I mean, we are talking about very intimate stories that our clients are sharing, the most intimate, the highs and the lows of their lives. And if we want them to feel comfortable sharing those, then we have to be our full authentic selves also. I can't try to be some perfect version of myself because that won't be real. That won't be authentic and that person will sense that right away. So I've sort of given up trying to be whatever I thought a CEO had to look like or act like and just try to be me to the fullest extent that I can be with them, totally honest. I'm sitting in my own home, and this is my real background. This is not a fake background. And this is how when I have calls with clients, I am here in my home and they can see my home. And sometimes they see a dog walk by or one of my kids. And that's the reality of this work. But we're also going into their homes, via Zoom in these interviews. So we get to see them and we get to see them in their home environments. And I think all of those things they help to create that sense of connection and closeness because the client and the writer really do become very bonded through this sharing of intimate stories.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think
That
this
brings
is
me
all
to
a learning process.
absolutely. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast as opposed to watching this episode, Ilana's background actually does look like a green screen. It's so gorgeous, but it is real. I've seen it in real life because she lives down the street from me. So yeah, if you're looking for any background inspo, this is the look right here.
That's funny.
Okay,
Thank
but
you.
that brings me to, you're talking about people and them getting vulnerable and sharing their stories. How do they handle and how do you handle when they have very challenging, painful memories that are brought up through this process?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, we tell all our clients a few things. One, it's your story and you get to tell it the way you want. So there's no pressure to share something you're not comfortable sharing. This is not therapy. This is your memoir. And it's your version of your story. Now, having said that, I also encourage our clients to not censor themselves in the interviews, to share everything, because there's always the opportunity later to edit out anything that they decide they're not comfortable including in their story. So I do think it's important to be open to the extent that you're comfortable with, sharing both the happier memories and also the more challenging ones. I can tell you from my own experience, having my mother's done her book and my parents are divorced. And I know it wasn't easy for my mom to talk about the divorce, but it's important for me to hear it. And it's important for my kids to know what my mom went through and how she became a single mother and what that experience was like. And if she had completely glossed over it, there would have been a huge part of her story missing. So I think it's important. Your loved ones want to know you and they want to know all about what you've lived through and where did you find that inner strength to get through those difficult moments and to find, your own happiness later on after you've survived it. So those challenging moments are important. They're a part of your story. And just like we're talking about being authentic and showing our real faces and our real backgrounds, telling your real story is important. But if you aren't comfortable sharing it, it's okay too. It's not a reason to not tell your story at all. Like I wouldn't let that put you off from writing your memoir and from telling your story.
Yeah, I feel like so much of the wisdom that we gain in life and the growth that we experience comes from those challenging or very difficult
Definitely.
times. And so by leaving those out, I hear how that would be like this big void and opportunity to almost teach the next generation the lessons and give them the words of wisdom that you were able to gain. W
Exactly. And there's so many times where if you like I was reading my grandfather's story. He also wrote his memoirs and I had no idea about some of the things he had lived through and I wish he was alive now because I've gone through those challenging moments and it's a connection point that I never knew we had. That we've each experienced similar challenges. But it does make you feel closer to that person when you realize that they've also lived through those things, those similar, uh, you know, challenges in life. And not everything was always rosy, even if they appeared to you on the outside to have everything together. Now you know the truth that they were just like you. They struggled also.
Yeah.
So it really humanizes that person and can create deeper connections and a feeling of closeness to somebody you might
Mm.
not have ever even met.
Mhm. So that brings up another question, which is when is the right time to tell your story and to create a memoir to work with capture your story?
Well, I think that I consider writing your memoir something that should be a part of legacy, estate planning. So if you're ever thinking about writing a will, for instance, or what you want to leave to your children and grandchildren, I want to suggest that your life story is as much a legacy that they would want to inherit as any material thing. I like to say that you should leave behind your values, not just your valuables, because that is really their true inheritance that they can gain from you. The things that you hold most dear to you, the things that have guided you in your life, and the things that you hope your children and grandchildren will carry on in theirs, you need to share them. They won't just know them through osmosis. They will only know them if you tell them. So writing your life story, explicitly telling them the values that have guided you and that you hope they'll carry on, the words of wisdom and the life lessons that you've accrued throughout your life. These are all things that you can include in your life storybook. We even have a whole section devoted to those. So I think, you're never too, there's never an age where you're too late or too early to write your story. It's when you feel you're ready to tell it. But I would encourage everybody to do it if they are, you know, thinking about it. Now is the time, because you never know what can happen in life. And God forbid, so many extenuating circumstances can come along. There could be an accident, there could be an illness, there could be memory loss. And when those things happen, you realize it can be too late. So the most important thing is not to live with regret and to get it done. If you're able to, then I encourage everybody to do it.
That's great. And what about for the people who think, well, I don't really have a story. Like my life was pretty boring. I just went through the motions, did what I was supposed to do, whether it was a woman of a past generation who maybe, stayed home with her family and feels like, well, she didn't really have any sort of fascinating career. Or maybe it was, I don't know, a man who worked in a 9 to 5 job that he just didn't find that interesting. What would you say to somebody like that?
We've
Who is
had
like, "Well, I don't know if I have valuables, but I don't have anything else." What else is
uh,
there?
everybody has a story to tell. And even if you don't think it's that exciting, to your children and grandchildren, it is. They want to know about you because they love you, care about you, and are interested in you. We had a client, an older woman whose 2 adult daughters hired us to write her story. And she was, as you say, she was a stay-at-home mother who, when her girls left the home, she became a teacher. And she said to me at the beginning, I really don't have a story. It's not interesting. And by the end, we made a video recording her words, because she said, I had no idea I had such a story to tell. Her daughters were so grateful for the book that we ended up writing about her, because she was an incredible mother, an incredible grandmother. She also went through a divorce, and the example she set for them really is like a beacon to them. They think of her as their hero. She was there for them in all of the difficult moments. And just because she didn't have some kind of illustrious career doesn't mean that her story wasn't important, because it is important.
It's
Very
really
important to them.
beautiful.
Yeah,
And how special for their family, the girls and
definitely.
the
Right. And she also
grandchildren and
had an
future
incredible
generations.
family history that she was able to tell. Her grandfather had been a governor, and I think her father had worked on the railroads. I mean, really interesting stories about building the United States. They were part of the early pioneers who came and helped build the country. So that's also very interesting, even if it wasn't like, somebody rich and famous. It was somebody that really contributed. Um, and her memories of that time were really fascinating.
Cool. The blood, sweat, and tears that go into a life
Exactly.
well lived and a business well grown.
Yes.
Um, Getting back to that, you talked about really how this business journey has helped you grow that or feel more comfortable stepping into that space of authenticity and confidence as you have moved through your business. What is one tip you have for other women who are striving to find their authentic voice in business?
Oh gosh. I think it is hard to figure out who you are and to get away from all the noise of what you've been told you're supposed to be. But I think it's sort of this inner voice that feels right. When you're speaking with full confidence and it feels comfortable to you, that's the right path. There are so many ways where I had to shed sort of these expectations in order to kind of step into this role of, CEO and like striking that right balance of being the leader and hiring and firing and all these things while still, treating all of the people that work with me with the respect and even friendship that I feel towards them, because we're all in this together. We're all building this together. And I'm really grateful to them. And I just want to be my own authentic self and not try to be what I thought a CEO was supposed to be, like very harsh or very cold, or, keep a distance and not let them into my personal life. I'm not really like that. It doesn't feel right to me. So I do try to, there is some, professional distance, meaning we're not all hanging out and going out for drinks every night together. But I do think it's nice to check
Karaoke.
in. Yeah, we're not karaokeing all the time, but I do like to know what's happening with their families, checking on them, making sure they're okay. And I feel like it's sort of, you know, that balance, which is a tricky balance, but an important one, of like treating everybody like a family. I do refer to the Capture Your Story team as a family when I'm signing letters or, speaking about them, because I feel close to them and I care about them, and I feel gratitude towards them because they're helping me to build my dream. And I couldn't do it without them.
It's a
So
great tip. There is no one way to be a CEO, and the best way is to find your way.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Ilana, for being here, for sharing that, for sharing with us the importance of everybody telling their story and reminding us that each of us has a story. Where can people connect with you to learn more about you and capture your story?
You can go to our website, which is www.captureyourstory.org. And you can always reach out to me either through the website or on our Facebook page, or you can send me an email. My email is Ilana, ILANA, at captureyourstory.org. And I will get right back to you. And thank you, Rachel, for having me. This was such a nice conversation. I love being with you.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, I will link Alana's contact information and website in the show notes. And I want to encourage you that if this episode struck a chord or generated an insight that you'd like to share, that you head over to the podcast wherever you're listening to comment, like, and share this episode. And of course, to subscribe so you don't miss anything coming up in the future. Until next time, keep sharing your voice.